Butte, and I'm here with my friends Bob Bezotte, and he's running for Michigan's 47th State District, and Paul Young, who's running for United States Congress in Michigan's 8th District. And I'm here with Mark. How's it going, Mark?
Hi, I'm here from Livingston 2A, and we wanted to have a little informal town hall and get a little bit of dialogue going with a couple of our local Pro 2A candidates.
Yeah, and I want to start off just from the very fundamentals, because you know, you talk about specific gun control issues, but I want to start off with from the very beginning. So there's this idea, and it's my opinion, the United States was founded that these are God-given rights endowed by our Creator. So I wanted to start off right there. Do you believe these rights are going to supersede any type of law or bill you pass, and that they were given to us and that you're here to protect that? Or do you believe that in Michigan you can actually, you know, give us our gun rights or whatever?
No, they're definitely God-given rights, and we definitely need to protect them. Every election we need to protect them, and now more than ever before.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Bob, and I think the sentiment of your question, I mean, the Declaration of Independence talks about these being God-given rights, among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then the very next phrase is, and then we establish a government to protect and preserve those rights and those liberties. So yeah, these rights, a piece of legislation that Bob will pass in Lansing and that I might pass in Washington, is just under the Constitution to further guarantee those God-given rights.
Would you say that the Constitution is generally there to restrain government or to restrain people?
Well, I would say it's not there fundamentally to restrain people. If there is restraint, it's the restraint of government. Yeah, no, I really do think that we have, as Michael was suggesting, God-given rights, and we form a government to protect those rights. So in the absence of government, we would probably have tyranny or you know, mobs that we're seeing in too many big cities. So we need a government to protect that, but the Constitution puts limits on the government, because another thing we see in human nature is, and we see in perhaps Governor Whitmer, is a desire to abuse those powers and grab too much. So yeah, the Constitution is far more to limit government, not people.
And there's some people that have, some politicians will say, well, and I'll ask you first, Paul. Some people say, well, as long as you still allow them to have one gun or a few guns, then you're still allowing them to have rights, and it goes back to that again. What's your view on that with the Second Amendment? How much compromise should there be as far as whittling it down or trading with it?
Well, let me make an analogy to your First Amendment rights. Should you be allowed to just have a couple opinions that you're allowed to express, or should you only be allowed to suggest this idea to a certain degree, but then we're going to limit you because you... No, that's absurd. You have a right to keep and bear arms. It doesn't say we'll let you have, you know, one, you know, rusty shotgun and a historical piece or something. No, you have the right to keep and bear arms. So the analogy I'm making of the First Amendment, it's that you get to say your opinions at whatever volume, at whatever regularity, even if some of them are kind of offensive. Second Amendment rights, you get to keep and bear arms.
And what's your view on that?
Oh, I agree 100% with that. There's no limit on how many guns. I got a couple friends that own 400 plus guns. I've got probably 10 handguns, a shotgun, and a rifle. And
so you're a beginning collector.
Yeah, but there's no limit on it, and you got to be careful on the people that we elect, because I think that's their end game, that's their goal, either to eliminate and try to limit ammunition in the process of taking your gun rights away. So got to be careful on who you elect into office.
So we already know that Every Town for Gun Safety is active here in Michigan. They're active in over a dozen cities, and we know they're not just getting together for tea and crumpets. How do we combat that here in Michigan?
Well, you guys have started that process with 2A, our local 2A, Livingston County, and this needs to grow. We need to make sure we sustain that and keep it going, because you can guarantee somewhere they're sitting around the same thing we're doing right here and saying, okay, how can we take their guns? It's an ongoing process for them, and we've got to have that mindset that we're going to do everything we can to protect our rights, our grandkids' rights, and their kids' rights. This is just not going on right now. I mean, this is 10, 15 years, 20 years going down the road. Those are the rights that we're trying to protect as well. And Paul mentioned earlier that President Trump said many times the 2016 election was the most important election, and it was at the time. And now you look at, this is the most important election in 2020, but President Trump also said what he worries about is 2024 and after. And that's what 2A protects, and that's what we're all trying to protect, is those rights, not only in this election cycle, but beyond.
Paul, how do you think we combat the big money funding from people like Bloomberg and Soros of these groups like Everytown for Gun Safety? How can it be exposed for what it is, and what do we do about it?
Well, I think, Bob's already successfully represented folks both as an elected sheriff and in his job as a county commissioner. If he gets to the state legislature, if I get to Washington, I think both of us will work hard, one, to pass legislation, whether it's to create further guarantees for our God-given rights, as Micah was talking about, or to repeal legislation, maybe not as much in Michigan as we see nationwide, some of the more activist jurisdictions that seek to repel. At the federal level, we might be able to say, hey, you don't get to do that. But another part of the equation is, Bob is an elected leader, me as a hopefully elected leader after November. We can use our platform to speak about the virtues of gun ownership, and to talk about this isn't, let's not just be defensive about protecting our right, but let's celebrate that right. Let's talk about why people possessing arms can to not just defend their homes, but if they're out, they can stop crimes that occur, and we can tell the positive stories, and we can, instead of the constant negative, oh, you want a gun? You're a dangerous person. No, you're a courageous American. You're an American who's ready to not just protect yourself, but protect others. And start to change that narrative. So it's not just being a legislator, it's also being a public leader, I think.
Yeah, this is going to be to both of you. I guess I'll go to Bob first. It's going to be a little different, but excuse me, same question. So sometimes people like me, I have tens of thousands of viewers, and some videos hundreds of thousands of viewers, and they'll bring certain issues to my attention. And they'll say things like, did you notice this is nested in this funding bill, that they're actually going after our guns?
Yes.
And many people try to get a hold of their elected representatives in Lansing. Sometimes they seem to have a hard time doing that. So when you're elected to Lansing, how can people get a hold of you? Like me, for example, if I need to get a hold of you and say there's a bill, and I have dozens of people showing me that sentence number 87 kind of poisons the bill, how will we be able to get a hold of you and actually let you know what's going on?
Well, everybody talks about transparency, but I'm very transparent. I've got my cell phone number on all my advertising and on my website. You can go there, and I'm accessible to anybody that wants to talk to me at any time. So I think that's very important for a politician, to be accessible. If you have to go through certain steps or chain of command to get to your elected official, I view that as that's an issue. I mean, you have to have staff to take care of the multitude of calls that you get, but some of the important ones, I know right now they do Townhall coffee. Dr. Vopel, who's our current state rep, on Mondays and Fridays, he gets together in the community, and I plan to continue that, so I'm going to be readily accessible to the voters.
So if I need to get there, somebody like me, not specifically me, needs to go there because there's 250 people that have an issue.
Yeah.
I could have access to your office to still be able to talk to you once you get elected.
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Now you're going to have a far larger constituency. Obviously, like he said, you need staff. You can't have hundreds of thousands of people. But same thing. Say Pelosi's putting a poison pill into something that looks like it's good. You didn't have time to really look at it close enough, but I noticed it. How can normal people still get a hold of you in Washington?
Well, hopefully through a lot of different means. Telephone calls, you get through by email. But one thing I think I want to make sure I'm clear about is should I be elected, I don't view myself as I'm going off to Washington for 2 years. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely. I expect there probably won't be a weekend that I'm not back here in the district. And there's a lot of problems with the restrictions we're seeing around the coronavirus. One of them is it has limited gatherings of people, and we need to overcome that, because part of what a legislator will do, certainly part of what I will do, is get out to events, not just opportunities to interact with leaders such as yourself in the movement, but with people more broadly and more generally. So make sure I'm having it, as Bob was talking about, have those coffee events. Make sure you're getting to events so that people if they didn't make an appointment or if they were frustrated, because as you very kindly point out, if you're representing, a couple 100,000 people, it's, as a practical matter, you can't on a
Right.
regular basis be talking to them all the time. But if you're getting to events, if you're going to visit a different church congregation, or if you're getting to a different Republican event, or getting to a different, 2A gathering, people have a chance to come up and talk to you, before, during, after that event. So, through formal channels, giving me a call, sending me a letter, email, but also getting out and being amongst folks so they can come out and chat with you.
One of the things that I've noticed, and Bob, you'll probably remember when we were kids too, it was okay to take a rifle in your car to school because it was the first day of hunting season and nobody even thought twice about it. Things have shifted so far in the other direction now that, I work with a local gun club, youth shooting league, but they don't even get to have the results of their competitions in their school paper or anything like that because schools want nothing to do with it.
Mark, it's almost worse than that. You'll get remote learning and the teacher thinks they see a Nerf gun or something in the background to get the kids to spend. So, sorry, it's just going nuts.
So how do we execute a paradigm shift back to guns aren't evil, and in particular, how do we get rid of this public school indoctrination that's happening?
Well, I was around when, during the time we live in a country setting where people would come to school with the rifle or the shotgun in the back, and I seen the changes where, schools panic. We never had a school shooting, thank God, and hopefully we can continue to have that success, but it can happen in any community, and I think it's the mindset of our school officials that has changed it a lot, and quite frankly, the school officials are primarily Democrat. Their point of view is completely different than our point of view. They want to respond. If they have an incident, they want to make kind of like laws or policies that affect everybody, even though it's the same thing going on with the gun movement. So I've seen those policies, and I think we have to have, in my opinion, not only on my level but Paul's level, we have to be consistently electing. And I'll say this many, many times. You guys will probably get tired of me saying this, but you got to pay attention to who you're electing into office. You got to elect like-minded people. We're all good citizens. I was on the gun board for probably 20 years, and I can remember one time that we issued all the license we issued that we had to take one back. So the people that are coming in and exercising their God-given rights for the Second Amendment are law-abiding citizens. They want to protect their rights, they want to exercise their rights, and we can't let the schools or anybody else infringe on those rights, period.
Paul, your thoughts on how we can shift the paradigm away from this anti-gun in the schools thing that we see so regularly?
Well, there's no question it's going to be a not easy challenge because, just so many of the portrayals you see in the media and the portrayals from these well-funded groups that you've been talking about portray the notion that somehow a firearm in and of itself is this evil or bad thing, and that if you see someone with a firearm, oh, there's great danger there. Well, that's simply not true. I mean, we all know on this panel that I want to say the overwhelming majority, what are we going to say? It's 98, 99% or more of people who own firearms, they're decent law-abiding folks, and if they're ever going to use them, it's going to be in defense of themselves, of property, or defense of others. So we've got to do what we can to dispel it. I know I've said this on other occasions, and I'm definitely happy to say it now. I think people like Bob Bezotte or myself, we won't just be passing legislation, but we will have opportunities where we'll be talking about it. And if we can help get that message out that a gun in and of itself is not this evil thing, but it is a tool, and it depends on whose hands it's in. And I know I've talked with folks on other occasions that when we want to talk about violent crime, the notion that we need more laws to control access to firearms is kind of coming at it totally ineffective. We have laws on the books. We have, Bob used to be the sheriff here. He would make a case, and then the prosecutors would finish that case against a violent criminal, send them to prison, and we've got too many systems now that are letting them out early so they can go out and commit those violent crimes again. That's the problem. That's what you need to do to control violence, not putting new restrictions and prohibitions on otherwise law-abiding citizens.
So you're not for letting out violent criminals and locking up hairstylists?
That's a rhetorical question. No, listen, I'm a former prosecutor, and I didn't work here in the county, so I didn't finish any of the cases that Bob got started. But you're right. I mean, when the justice system works, one, frequently by good policing, you can stop a crime before it occurs. But on those occasions where a violent crime is committed, police do the good work of putting a case together, the prosecutor works with them and gets that after a trial, gets a felon is now a convicted felon, or they're not a felon until they're convicted. But yes, if once you've been through that system, they should be in prison. And they're there not just to punish, but also to protect. And letting folks out is happening far too often. And I should point out, there's been some terrible legislation from Alyssa Slotkin to release violent criminals. And that's just, that's in nobody's interests. And if I get to Washington, you can be sure I'll be behaving differently.
Paul made a couple good points. The funding sources, how do we, and it's going to take money. We're fighting the media on this issue. The NRA, both Paul and I are lifetime members of the NRA. The reason why we're supporting the NRA is because they're the most recognized group out there that is fighting on behalf of 2A people. This 2A group that has started because of the resolution that Rob and Rick started, and a few of the other Micah started it. That was an important foundation, and we've got to keep this movement going, not only in Livingston County, but throughout Michigan and throughout our country, because we have sat back, and I can tell you, I'm a little bit older than everybody, in the 70s and 80s when everybody was saying, well, you can't say this, you can't, the politically correct stuff, we're saying, don't worry about it, it's just some, but now you see where it's gone. I mean, it's really out of control now, so how do you take that back? So the question you ask is an excellent question. We've let this, go on for so long. Now taking it back is going to take a couple generations, but we can't give up the fight. We got to move forward and continue with the good work that you guys are doing as well.
And what do you guys think about the idea, or rather the fact, I guess, that a huge majority of the Antifa protesters being arrested are school teachers?
That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, their point of view, and I've got some good friends that are union people, and they recognize, and now they're turned into Trump people, but they're afraid to step out and say. But unfortunately, the majority of those people are Democrats. They have a different philosophy, a different point of view than what we have. And again, it's so important to pay attention to who you're electing into office. And I've said many times that when the gun laws changed here, the permit to carry and all those things changed around 2000, 2003 in that time frame, we had a prosecutor that ran as a Republican but was a Democrat. He won 8 terms, 4-year terms as a Democrat. And when those gun laws changed, his true colors came out because he took his person off the gun board, so you got to remember, for 24 years he applied his point of view to the law, and they're not supposed to do that. Prosecutors, as Paul will tell you, you're supposed to apply the law.
That's right.
And you're not supposed to make it up and go as you please. So it's. I just continue to say that you got to pay attention to who you elect. And Paul, if you look at sit down and talk to Paul about his point of view he's on the right side of the issues, as far as I'm concerned, and that's why I've endorsed Paul, and that's why I'm supporting him.
Well, and to pick up on your point, that Antifa, they are antithetical to everything I think good Americans should stand for.
Yeah.
Micah, your first question I think was about our God-given rights. They are about tearing down our historical norms. They're about ignoring, the Lord's role in our lives and in our country and in our founding. They want to tear it all down. They're not just tearing down statues. They want to tear everything that we've got down. And
where are they flourishing at, Paul? I mean, they're flourishing in Democratic-run governors. You look at all the states, the top 10 or 12 states that are having these issues and have been for quite a long time being run by Democrats.
Yeah, and so that'll be a little bit of a challenge, because you're right. It's cities, whether it's Seattle or Portland or Atlanta, that haven't had a Republican mayor for decades.
Right.
And neither you nor I are running for mayor of any of those cities.
Right.
But as we've been talking about on some of these other subjects, it's leadership that matters. I mean, Alyssa Slotkin enables Nancy Pelosi to be speaker. And when Nancy Pelosi is asked, hey, when it comes to some mob tearing a statue down, shouldn't there be a public hearing? Shouldn't that be a government board that makes, if you're going to remove a statue, shouldn't that be the way you do it? And Nancy Pelosi says, people will do what people will do. That's shocking.
Yeah.
That's enabling mob violence. That's just everything that's wrong. And so, whether it's as a federal legislator, whether it's a state leader, we have to set an example of no. Guaranteeing people's constitutional rights, establishing safe and secure communities, that's got to be a priority. And it's sad to say, but we just don't seem to see that from the other party.
And we've seen that for a while. And as a law enforcement, I could have retired and walked away, but I want to stay involved because it's so important today to stay involved and to educate our kids coming up. As much as the colleges are destroying our kids, we have to constantly kind of tell them, that there's a reason that we're Americans and we have flags in the schools. Did you guys know that in Brighton we didn't have flags in the schools? They disbanded flags in the school, and it's a state law that you have to have flag in every classroom. And John Conley, who was on the school board, was the one that brought that up and made them put the flags back in the school and do the Pledge of Allegiance. So somewhere along the line we've lost that, and we've got to get it back in the schools.
They got rid of the flags recently?
Yeah, about 3 years ago, John Conley made them put them back in the schools. So even on the school boards, we need people to run in the cities. You look at the city of Howell, the city of Brighton are ran by Democrats, and they're both broke. They're in financial trouble. But the Livingston County, we're one of the wealthiest counties in the state of Michigan, and it's because you've had a Republican commissioners for 50 years.
So when you see some of this stuff going on, like white suburban kids flooding into depressed neighborhoods and rioting there and looting and burning and then going back to mom's basement, or when you see a statue of Frederick Douglass or Ulysses S. Grant come down, how do you even start to combat crazy? Because that's the only way I see it is, this isn't about any cause, this is about being violent and instigating destruction without reason. So how do you combat that?
We've handcuffed our law enforcement by our philosophy of some of our governors and mayors in the big cities, and unfortunately, I spent my whole life. I started in '73 in law enforcement. I feel bad for the men and women that are out there trying to protect their communities, because now they got to worry about the politics getting involved in enforcing laws. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes. We can look at the George Floyd tape, and we can all recognize that there was something that shouldn't have happened. We get that. But the overwhelming contacts that we have with law enforcement, the millions of contacts we have, by far are good contacts, and they're applying the law. But the unfortunate part is, I've talked to a lot of my friends. We're pretty good here because our sheriff is a Second Amendment person. Our guys go out and they enforce the laws. But their friends in some of the more liberal communities, they're saying, I'm going to be more reactive instead of proactive. And that's where you have a problem.
Yeah, I kind of want to pick up on what Bob was saying. I mean, former sheriff. I'm a former prosecutor, and I've worked with lots of law enforcement officers. So both anecdotal information, but also study after study, the overwhelming majority of the men and women that put on a uniform and risk their lives every day to protect us are good people, are very competent as law enforcement. They are constantly directed towards doing their jobs and doing them right. So the rare occasions where we see a bad actor, that's very rare, and what it really comes down to, too often, and Bob talked about this too. He says, new people in the profession, gosh, it feels kind of bad for them, and that's because of a failure of political leadership.
Yes.
When mayors or governors don't defend law enforcement officers who have a tough job, but instead quickly judge them as being in the wrong, you're going to draw back as a law enforcement officer and say, look, when there's real immediate danger, yes, I'll have to go and do something. But should I proactively engage in something that might blow up on me and get me in trouble when I know that these political leaders are ready to cut me out? No, they're not going to do that, and that's terrible. That's bad for the entire community. So if we want safe and secure communities where people's lives, property, rights are protected, we've got to have political leadership that stands up and says, we recognize that law enforcement is a tough job, a necessary job, and a job that's being done by well-trained professionals who are almost, I mean, almost all the time doing the right thing.
Right.
Sure. It amazes me that when we see doctors or lawyers in society misbehave, nobody immediately says, hey, let's go get all the doctors and lawyers. But as soon as a police officer does something that everybody doesn't agree with, you throw them all out. How do you get past that? How do you elevate police work to a status more like doctor or lawyer as far as the eyes of the community? How do we achieve that?
Well, we're fortunate in Livingston County. We have 9 agencies, 10 if you count the metro parks, and we have overwhelming support with our elected officials. And so we're fortunate in this district, but I see, as you move around Michigan even, look what happened to the Lowell police officer, or chief. I mean, he was terminated after 27 years of service, and all he did was support law-abiding Second Amendment people. That's all he did, and he got terminated. So his life is ruined. He's 5 months away from retirement, and his whole family is in turmoil now, and that shouldn't happen because of a political position on an issue. And it's unfortunate when the law enforcement officers got to take notes and say, okay, I got a prosecutor that's is he Republican or Democrat? Okay, he has a good point of view. And then my mayor, how's he feel about these things? It's almost like you got to interview him and say, okay, well, how do you feel in these situations? And so elections do have consequence, and we really have to pay attention. I have 3 daughters, and all 3 of them are Republicans, thank goodness. But they tell their kids, I got 2 of them that are really talking to their kids about, and you're talking about 7 to 9, 10-year-old kids, and okay, this is what's going on. And that's where it's gonna take some generations to get back to some sense of normalcy.
But I also think it is a little bit of a leadership issue. I mean, I don't think most people, it's kind of a radical, loud minority. I hope it's a minority that speaks ill of the police. I think most people do respect police officers, and even if you're having an interaction you don't want, like you get pulled over for speeding, you need to act respectfully, sign for your citation and go along and say, darn it, but you respect the work that they're doing. And that's, I think, part of why this election is so important. We see one of our major parties, the Democratic Party, that they had a 4-day national convention, and they never once spoke about the urban unrest, the rioting, the looting, the mob violence. They never spoke about it. The Republican Party is standing up and saying, look, we have to enforce our laws. We have to back up our law enforcement to have safe and secure communities. That's kind of a foundational thing, and it's wherever it comes from, whether it's social media or whatever it is, you seem to have one party that is in fear of that, what I hope and think is a very loud minority, because I think the broad majority of Americans want law enforcement to do their job and want to back them, and that's why we need to elect leaders that will realize that for them and back up law enforcement when they're doing it.
That's a great point, Paul, because I look back when I was in law enforcement, 8 years of President Obama. I didn't vote for President Obama, but he was my president, and it was so disheartening for him to come out and attack law enforcement on so many different occasions, because that does say a lot to the public. Okay, he didn't support law enforcement. I think we can all agree to that, and that tells everybody out there that, kind of free reign, and we've seen that play out in our cities today. Now we have a president that is pro-military and pro-law enforcement, and that's what we need. That's why this election is very important, to get President Trump back in there and get Paul to Washington, because Alyssa Slotkin, I met her two months into her election, or she was already elected, and she told me at a fundraising event for Walk for Warmth that she was going to be different. She was going to go work with the other side. She wasn't going to be the typical Democrat. A month later, I saw her on TV talking about impeaching the president, and we all know that was all it was ridiculous, and we all know it as Americans. So she even lied to the public to get elected, and that's why I think it's important to get Paul up in Washington and get somebody there that'll protect our rights, especially our Second Amendment rights.
I have one specific issue that I want to talk about, and this is probably the most important issue to many people. And it's one that unfortunately, although I support him, and I know you guys do too, I think President Trump's spoken out in the wrong direction on it. This is red flag laws. So as a prosecutor, Trump said, I like to take them quick, take the guns first, then due process. Now I hope he misspoke, and he's not perfect, but I want to know if you support red flag laws, even if the president does. And I know that's a tough question, but even if Trump says, I want red flag laws, what will you do?
Well, I appreciate the question. I oppose red flag laws. They're unconstitutional, typically on at least two grounds. One, they violate our Second Amendment rights, but they also violate our due process rights. And I'm absolutely glad we got this topic in before we finish today. I'm opposed to them, and it's interesting too, because one of the critiques I make of Alyssa Slotkin is that she constantly votes with her party leadership.
There you go.
And so I sometimes then get asked, well, gee, Paul, will you ever stand up to President Trump? I think President Trump has been a great leader in this country, but that doesn't mean he's perfect or he doesn't make mistakes. So if in fact that's a true expression of his beliefs, that's one area that I'll disagree with.
And I hope it's not. And that was meant to be a two-pronged question, because so often we see this, and it's okay because I support President Trump, but I can still criticize him. I think especially I can if he's on the wrong side of something, and I want to know if there's going to be some Republicans, for once, that don't always just go with somebody just because they have an R behind their name. So I thought that was important.
I oppose red flag laws, and if they come up in the Congress, I will oppose them. But as you're suggesting, I would expect when President Trump gets reelected more often than not to be supporting him. But there will be an occasion where not and no, and I won't just stand up just because somebody has an R behind their name. It's going to be the issues in defending our constitutional rights.
How about in Michigan?
Well, Paul and I are both from the law enforcement field, and we have seen the abuses, and you've heard me talk about these abuses on local elections, even in Livingston County. So it is a state issue and a federal issue. The red flag laws, I've seen abuses from our prosecutor's office. We all recognize those. You get a liberal judge, and that's why Paul's election is very important, because of the Supreme Court. So his taking that seat back is vital to the success, not only of what we're trying to do here today, but red flag laws are dangerous in the wrong hands of people that don't apply the law appropriately. We have laws on the books that, if, for instance, and Paul was in domestic violence, if you go to domestic violence, you try to get the victim
Right.
or the weapons removed, one or the other, so then you don't have to come back and deal with an assault or even maybe a murder. So you can't take the guns out of the house, but you can with permission. So you have to try to accomplish one of those two things. But red flag laws they're dangerous, and we need somebody in Lansing and somebody in Washington that recognizes that. And I love President Trump, but that's one thing I disagree with him on.
Well, we have two people in the room. I think we have a quick opportunity to dispel a popular myth. Law enforcement, prosecutor, in past lives, right?
Yes.
Do we already have methods where if there's imminent threat or danger, let's say to the wife or to the husband, vice versa, can we already remove a gun from somebody that's violent without these red flag laws?
Temporarily, you can do that, but the wife usually gives you permission, so you're within your legal rights, so you don't get sued, to take that weapon away, because you have to protect the Second Amendment. So if you can't get permission to move the weapon, then we try to move the victim away from the house. So there are laws in place, and there are things that we can do to protect the victim. So, and of all the domestic violences that I was involved in, I don't know if Paul can, based on I never went back and had a shooting or somebody hurt with a weapon. So we were pretty successful, and I've never heard in our community or in the state of Michigan where that happened, where you left a weapon or left the victim and then somebody else was killed. I know that's probably something that possibly happened, but I was never involved in any of that.
The good work of law enforcement, using their instincts and using their training, they typically do have the tools. Again, not that they're perfect, but that they can make judgments with existing law. And I know Mark and I have talked on previous occasions about this, that it's not that we don't have laws to protect people and that we don't have ways to do it. It's that we don't follow through. We don't, as I've mentioned to government, we don't have the political leadership that will do it, or we have political leadership that undermines and tries to handcuff, maybe to use the wrong analogy, law enforcement, or is releasing violent criminals out. While they're pretending to be interested in public safety in one hand, they're doing things that undermine it in the other hand. So I think the tools and the laws are there. As a future legislator, I'll always listen to new potential proposals if there's a gap that we need to fill to protect people. But no, I think we have the tools that we need.
So even in our community, you have people that have different points of view and want to take guns away from people, and that's what you got to pay attention to.
So with that, we need to wrap it up. Thanks to Paul and Bob. Thanks to Micah from 2A EDU for coming out today and having this chat with us. And look for us again sometime soon, bringing you more information about your elected officials or those who are running to be so.